Hello everyone, if you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
One letter changed everything. Have you ever opened an ordinary envelope and realized your future might already be waiting inside? That happened to me on a quiet Tuesday afternoon here in the United States. I thought it was just another piece of mail mixed in with grocery coupons and utility bills. Instead, it became the beginning of a conversation that changed the way my husband and I looked at money, marriage, family, and even the dreams we wanted to protect together. If you think retirement planning is only for older people or wealthy families, stay with me. Because I believed exactly the same thing, and I was completely wrong. My name is Emily, and this story begins in the kitchen of our home, where life usually feels wonderfully ordinary. The coffee was still warm. My husband was preparing lunch while softly humming his favorite song. Sunlight filled the room, and everything seemed peaceful. Then I picked up a white envelope from the counter. Across the top were 3 words that immediately caught my attention. Retirement planning information. I almost laughed. Retirement? That sounded like something for people decades older than us. Without thinking, I placed the envelope back on the table and reached for my coffee instead. My husband noticed. "Aren't you going to open it?" he asked. I smiled. "Maybe next year." He laughed, but only for a second. Then he quietly said something I wasn't expecting. "That's exactly why you should open it today." His answer stayed in my mind long after the conversation moved on. Like many people, I believed planning for retirement meant giving up today's happiness to prepare for tomorrow. I imagined endless spreadsheets, confusing financial terms, and sacrificing every small pleasure. It sounded boring, stressful, and far away from the life we were enjoying together. But that afternoon, curiosity won. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside wasn't a frightening warning. It wasn't a complicated financial report either. Instead, it explained something surprisingly simple. Small decisions made today can create freedom many years later. That idea sounded almost too easy. Could tiny choices really make such a big difference? Behavioral scientists often explain that our brains naturally focus on immediate rewards instead of distant benefits. It is called present bias. Buying something fun today feels more exciting than saving for a future we cannot clearly imagine. That doesn't make us irresponsible. It simply makes us human. For the first time, I realized retirement planning wasn't really about getting old. It was about protecting future choices. Would we have time to travel? Would we be able to help our children if they needed us? Would we enjoy peaceful mornings together without worrying about every unexpected expense? Those questions suddenly felt much more personal than numbers on a page. As we sat together at the kitchen table, my husband slowly pointed to one sentence in the brochure. "Planning is an act of caring for your future self." I read it aloud several times because it became my unexpected English lesson of the day. Future self. Such a simple expression. Easy pronunciation. Easy vocabulary. Yet it carried a meaning much deeper than I expected. That is one reason I love learning English through real stories. You don't remember words because they are difficult. You remember them because they become part of your own life. I looked across the table at my husband and quietly asked, "Do you really think we should start thinking about this now?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he smiled, folded the brochure, and walked toward a small drawer in the living room. When he returned, he placed an old notebook in front of me. "I've been planning something," he said softly. I stared at the notebook without touching it. I had absolutely no idea that my husband had been keeping a secret for months. And what I discovered on the very first page would completely change everything I thought I knew about planning, love, and the future we were building together. The notebook I was never supposed to see. The notebook looked old, ordinary, and completely harmless. Yet the moment my husband placed it on the kitchen table, I could tell it carried a story he had never shared before. My heart immediately started inventing possibilities. Was it a financial journal? A retirement budget? A list of future expenses? I had no idea. Then he quietly smiled and said, "I started this long before that letter arrived." I slowly opened the first page, expecting numbers. Instead, I found something that made me forget about money completely. Written across the top of the page were 6 simple words. Our life after full-time work. Not retirement budget. Not savings plan. Not investment goals. Our life. That one word changed everything. The next pages weren't filled with calculations. They were filled with dreams. One page described slow morning walks around our neighborhood in the United States without checking the time. Another imagined weekend road trips to national parks we had always wanted to visit. One page simply read, "Have dinner with the kids every Sunday." I smiled without realizing it. This wasn't a notebook about getting older. It was a notebook about protecting happiness. My husband looked at me carefully. "I didn't want retirement planning to feel scary," he said. "I wanted it to feel hopeful." That sentence stayed with me all afternoon. Like many people, I had quietly associated retirement with endings. The end of work. The end of routine. The end of feeling productive. But my husband saw something completely different. He saw freedom. Psychologists often explain that people make better long-term decisions when they connect financial planning to personal values instead of fear. Saving money becomes much easier when you imagine the life it can create rather than the problems it might prevent. Looking at that notebook, I finally understood why. The dreams came first. The numbers came later. One page surprised me more than all the others. At the top, he had written, "Protect our peace." Below it, there was only one sentence. "I never want money to become the reason we stop enjoying ordinary days." I had to pause for a moment. Because I realized he wasn't trying to become rich. He was trying to keep our family calm. That simple difference completely changed how I viewed planning. As we talked, I noticed another beautiful English expression that was easy enough for anyone learning the language. One step at a time. My husband uses those words whenever life feels overwhelming. Whether we're talking about home repairs, work projects, or future plans, he never rushes. He simply says, "One step at a time." Simple vocabulary. Natural pronunciation. A phrase I now hear almost every week. That is exactly why I enjoy learning English through real conversations instead of memorizing random word lists. Everyday expressions become unforgettable because they belong to meaningful moments. Later that evening, we sat together adding new ideas to the notebook. Travel, health, family dinners, volunteer work, learning new hobbies. None of those dreams felt impossible anymore. They simply needed preparation. Then I noticed something strange. Between 2 pages, there was a folded sheet of paper that looked much newer than the rest. It wasn't part of the notebook. Someone had placed it there recently. I carefully unfolded it. At the top was a handwritten question. What would you regret if you waited too long? I looked at my husband. He wasn't smiling this time. His quiet answer to that question would lead us into one of the most emotional conversations we had ever shared about our future, our children, and the choices we still had time to make. One question we couldn't ignore. What would you regret if you waited too long? Those 8 words looked so simple on the folded piece of paper, yet they were powerful enough to silence our entire kitchen. I expected my husband to answer immediately, but he didn't. Instead, he looked out the window for a long moment as if he had been carrying that question in his heart for years. I suddenly realized this wasn't really about retirement anymore. It was about time itself. And time has a strange way of feeling endless. Until one ordinary day, it doesn't. I gently placed the paper back on the table. So, I asked quietly, what would you regret? He smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile people wear when they already know the answer. I'd regret assuming we always have more time. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Every morning, we followed familiar routines. We made coffee. We went to work. We cooked dinner together. We laughed over little mistakes. Life felt wonderfully normal. Because it felt normal, we unconsciously believed it would always stay that way. But nothing in life comes with that promise. My husband reached for the notebook again and opened another page I had never noticed before. At the top, he had written a simple title. Things money cannot buy later. The list surprised me. Healthy mornings together. Family dinners without rushing. Watching future grandchildren play. Long walks while our knees still felt strong. Helping our children without becoming a burden. There wasn't a single luxury item on the page. No expensive cars. No giant houses. No dream shopping lists. Only moments. Only people. Only time. That was the moment I truly understood something many financial experts quietly repeat. The best retirement planning isn't just about building wealth. It's about protecting the freedom to spend your future with the people you love most. Behavioral researchers often explain another interesting idea called future visualization. People who clearly imagine their future lives are far more likely to make consistent long-term decisions today. Suddenly, retirement planning no longer felt like preparing for old age. It felt like writing the next chapter of our family story while we still had the chance. As I sat there thinking, I realized I had been learning much more than planning. I had been learning perspective. Without noticing, another simple English expression became part of that evening. Time flies. My husband laughed after saying it. It really does. I smiled and repeated it slowly. Time flies. Only two easy words. Simple pronunciation. Natural conversation. Yet every time I hear that phrase now, I remember this exact evening in our kitchen. That is why learning English through meaningful stories works so well. The language stays connected to emotions instead of isolated vocabulary lists. The next Saturday, we decided to do something completely different. Instead of spending the afternoon shopping, we visited a local community event where several retired couples were sharing stories about life after full-time work. I expected conversations about investments. Instead, I heard stories about friendships, gardening, travel, volunteering, grandchildren, purpose. One elderly gentleman smiled at us and quietly said something I'll never forget. The earlier you plan, the less fear you'll carry. Everyone around him nodded. Then his wife laughed and added, and don't forget to plan your happiness too. On the drive home, neither my husband nor I spoke very much. Both of us were thinking. As we pulled into our driveway, my husband suddenly looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. There is something I haven't told you, he said softly. It isn't about money. My heart immediately began racing. If it wasn't about retirement, then what secret had he been protecting all this time? The secret had nothing to do with money. When my husband quietly said, "It isn't about money," my mind immediately went somewhere else. Had he received bad news? Was he hiding a health problem? Had something happened at work that he hadn't told me? In just a few seconds, I imagined a dozen terrible possibilities. It's amazing how quickly fear can fill in the blanks before the truth even has a chance to speak. I looked at him without saying a word. Then he took a slow breath and confessed something I never expected to hear. I've never been afraid of retirement, he said. I've only been afraid of running out of time with the people I love. The sentence was so simple that it almost didn't sound important. But it stayed with me. Not for minutes. For days. We sat quietly in the driveway for a while before going inside. Neither of us reached for our phones. Neither of us hurried to unpack the groceries. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was thoughtful. Sometimes the most meaningful conversations begin after the words have already been spoken. That evening, we prepared dinner together as usual, but everything felt a little different. While chopping vegetables, my husband smiled and said, "When people hear the words retirement planning, they usually think about numbers." I nodded. I think about memories. I looked at him and realized that was exactly why the notebook had touched me so deeply. It was never just a plan for the future. It was a promise not to postpone the life we were already building. Psychologists often describe a common habit called the someday mindset. We tell ourselves we'll travel someday, spend more time with family someday, slow down someday, or finally enjoy life someday. The problem is that someday rarely appears on a calendar. People who intentionally create plans for meaningful experiences often report greater life satisfaction because they stop waiting for the perfect moment and begin protecting time for what truly matters. That idea completely changed my understanding of planning. It wasn't about expecting the worst. It was about making room for the best. As dinner simmered on the stove, my husband looked at me and said another sentence that immediately became one of my favorite English expressions. Don't wait too long. Only 4 simple words. Easy to pronounce. Easy to remember. Yet those words carried more wisdom than many long speeches I had heard over the years. I quietly repeated them. Don't wait too long. That is one reason I enjoy learning English through everyday conversations. The phrases people use in real American homes are often short, natural, and filled with genuine emotion. You remember them because they become connected to real moments, not grammar exercises. Later that evening, we pulled an old photo album from the bookshelf. We laughed at funny hairstyles, family vacations, birthday parties, and ordinary weekends we had almost forgotten. What surprised me most was that none of our favorite memories involved expensive purchases. Almost every photo captured simple moments around people we loved. Then my husband closed the album and looked at me with a thoughtful smile. We've been planning our finances, he said. But maybe we should start planning our time just as carefully. That sentence changed something inside me. The following morning, I opened a blank page in our notebook and wrote a new heading. Things we want to do while we can. Before I could write the first idea, my phone suddenly rang. The caller ID displayed the name of someone I hadn't heard from in years. I answered with a smile. Within seconds, that smile disappeared. The unexpected news on the other end of the call would become the strongest reminder yet that tomorrow is never guaranteed, and that our conversation about planning had arrived at exactly the right moment. The phone call we never expected. The smile disappeared from my face almost instantly after I answered the phone. It wasn't an emergency, but it was the kind of news that quietly changes the way you think about your future. A close family friend here in the United States had decided to retire earlier than expected after facing an unexpected health challenge. She wasn't calling for sympathy. She simply wanted to tell us one sentence that she wished someone had told her years before. Don't only save your money, she said softly. Save your time, your health, and your relationships too. I never imagined one ordinary phone call could completely reshape the notebook my husband and I had just begun writing. After hanging up, I sat silently at the kitchen table. My husband didn't ask many questions. He could tell something important had happened just by looking at my face. I repeated our friend's words. He nodded slowly. That's exactly what I'd been trying to say. For the first time, I realized retirement planning wasn't divided into separate boxes called money, family, health, or happiness. They were all connected. Ignoring one eventually affects the others. That afternoon, we opened the notebook again. This time, we created 4 simple pages. Health, family, purpose, finances. To my surprise, the page about money was the shortest one. The page about life was much longer. We wrote small goals instead of impossible promises. Walk together 3 evenings each week. Visit our children more often. Learn one new skill every year. Keep date nights on the calendar. Protect one weekend every month from unnecessary work. None of these ideas required being retired. They simply required paying attention. Behavioral scientists often explain the power of tiny consistent habits. Research suggests that small actions repeated over long periods are far more sustainable than dramatic changes that disappear after a few weeks. Whether building financial security or improving relationships, consistency usually beats intensity. That idea gave me enormous peace. We didn't have to transform our lives overnight. We only needed to begin. As we continued writing, another beautiful English phrase naturally entered our conversation. Little by little. My husband smiled. That's how almost everything meaningful grows. I repeated it slowly. Little by little. 4 easy syllables. Simple vocabulary. A phrase commonly heard in everyday American conversations. Learning English suddenly felt much less intimidating because every expression carried a personal memory instead of existing as an isolated lesson. Later that evening, we cooked dinner together while talking about dreams instead of deadlines. The atmosphere felt lighter. Almost hopeful. We even laughed about how frightened I had been when I first saw the retirement planning envelope. I thought it was going to ruin my afternoon, I admitted. My husband laughed. It actually improved our future. I couldn't argue with that. Before going to bed, I placed the notebook on my nightstand instead of putting it away in a drawer. It no longer represented retirement. It represented intention. The next morning, something unexpected happened again. Our teenage daughter walked into the kitchen, noticed the notebook, and casually asked, "What are you two always writing about lately?" I smiled. Before I could answer, my husband handed her the notebook. "Take a look," he said. She quietly flipped through a few pages. Then she stopped reading, looked directly at both of us, and asked one simple question that neither of us had ever considered before. Her question would completely change the direction of our conversations, not only about retirement, but about the kind of family legacy we truly wanted to leave behind. The question our daughter asked. I expected my daughter to smile politely, close the notebook, and hand it back. Instead, she read several pages in complete silence before looking at both of us with a question so simple that neither my husband nor I had ever thought to ask ourselves. "Are you planning your retirement?" she said quietly, "or are you teaching me how to live?" The room became completely still. In that moment, I realized our little notebook had become much more than a family project. Without even trying, we had been writing lessons our children were already reading. My husband smiled first. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe both." Our daughter pulled out a chair and sat beside us. She wasn't interested in retirement accounts or financial terms. She was interested in the stories. She pointed to one page that read, "Family dinners matter." "Why did you write this one?" she asked. My husband looked at me before answering. "Because someday," he said softly, "you'll have your own busy life. We don't want to remember that we were too busy to enjoy the time we had together." Her eyes filled with quiet understanding. No dramatic speeches. No complicated advice. Just one honest answer. Family researchers have often found that regular shared meals strengthen emotional connection, improve communication, and create lasting memories for both parents and children. It isn't really the food that matters most. It is the consistent opportunity to pause, talk, and remind one another that everyone belongs. That evening, our dinner felt different. Not because the recipe had changed. Because our attention had changed. We listened more carefully. We laughed longer. Nobody reached for a phone. It felt surprisingly peaceful. As the conversation continued, my daughter asked another unexpected question. So, if planning is so important, why do most people wait? None of us answered immediately. Finally, I spoke. Maybe because planning makes the future feel real. She nodded thoughtfully. I think people are more afraid of thinking about tomorrow than tomorrow itself. Her words surprised all of us. Sometimes children notice truths adults quietly avoid. Later, while washing the dishes together, my husband smiled and introduced another simple English phrase that immediately became one of my favorites. Better early than late. I repeated it slowly. Better early than late. Clear pronunciation. Simple grammar. Exactly the kind of natural expression you might hear in everyday American conversations. Learning English through family moments feels different because every phrase carries an emotion. You don't simply remember vocabulary. You remember where you were, who said it, and why it mattered. The following weekend, our family attended a neighborhood community gathering where several retired couples shared stories about the choices they were most grateful they had made years earlier. One gentleman smiled warmly and said, "The smartest investment I ever made wasn't in the stock market." Everyone leaned forward. It was eating dinner with my family. The room filled with quiet laughter. Then his wife added, "And taking care of our health before we needed doctors to remind us." Their honesty felt refreshing. Nobody pretended life had been perfect. They simply appreciated the choices they had made early enough to enjoy the results later. On our drive home, the sunset painted the sky with beautiful shades of orange and gold. Our daughter quietly looked out the window before saying something that made both of us glance at each other. "I think I want to start my own notebook." I smiled proudly. Then she added one final sentence. "But first, I need to ask Grandma something she has never told me." Neither my husband nor I knew what she meant. The conversation waiting at Grandma's house would uncover a family story that had remained hidden for decades, and it would completely change the way all of us understood the true meaning of planning ahead. Grandma opened the old wooden box. The old wooden box had been sitting on Grandma's bookshelf for as long as I could remember, yet none of us had ever asked what was inside. When my daughter quietly said, "Grandma, can I ask you something about your future?" She smiled, stood up without saying a word, and reached for that dusty little box. My husband and I exchanged confused looks. We thought we were coming over for Sunday lunch. Instead, we were about to hear a family story that none of us had ever been told. The moment Grandma lifted the lid, I realized retirement planning wasn't the biggest inheritance she wanted to leave us. Inside the box were dozens of neatly folded letters. Some were tied together with faded blue ribbon. Others were tucked inside small envelopes with handwritten dates. My daughter looked surprised. "Are these old bills?" she asked. Grandma laughed softly. No. They're memories. She handed me the first letter. The paper had turned slightly yellow with age, but the handwriting remained beautiful. At the top were 4 simple words. For a rainy day. I smiled. I thought that phrase only meant saving money. Grandma gently shook her head. It can also mean saving hope. The room became completely quiet. She explained that many years ago she had started writing letters during ordinary seasons of life. Whenever something joyful happened, she wrote it down. When life became difficult, she reread those letters to remind herself that hard times never lasted forever. I had never heard anything like that before. Positive psychology researchers often explain that intentionally recording positive experiences helps strengthen emotional resilience. Our brains naturally remember stressful events more vividly than peaceful ones. So keeping meaningful memories can gently rebalance our perspective during challenging seasons. Suddenly, that little wooden box looked far more valuable than anything money could buy. Grandma smiled at my husband. Your retirement plan is important. Then she looked at me. But don't forget to build emotional savings too. I had never heard those words before. Emotional savings. The phrase stayed with me immediately. Later that afternoon, while helping Grandma prepare tea, she taught me another simple English expression. Rainy day. She smiled as she poured hot water into the teapot. In America, she explained, people often save money for a rainy day. Then she gently touched the wooden box. I save memories for rainy days too. I repeated it quietly. Save for a rainy day. Natural. Simple. Easy enough for every English learner to understand without needing difficult vocabulary. That is exactly why I enjoy learning English through family conversations. Expressions become unforgettable because they belong to real emotions instead of classroom exercises. As lunch continued, Grandma surprised us once again. She opened another envelope. Inside was a photograph of herself and Grandpa sitting on a small front porch many years ago. Neither of them looked wealthy. Neither wore expensive clothes. But both of them were laughing so hard that the picture almost seemed alive. Grandma smiled through tears. We weren't celebrating retirement. She paused. We were celebrating freedom from worrying every single day. No one at the table spoke. There was nothing to add. Only gratitude. As we prepared to leave that evening, Grandma quietly slipped one unopened envelope into my hand. Don't read this until tomorrow morning, she whispered. I looked at the date written across the front. It wasn't old. She had written it only 3 days earlier. Driving home through the quiet American streets, I couldn't stop wondering what could possibly be inside. The envelope felt strangely light. But somehow, I already knew the words waiting inside would become one of the most important lessons my family had ever received, and I had no idea they were about to change the final chapters of our story forever. The letter Grandma told me not to open. I barely slept that night. The unopened envelope Grandma had slipped into my hand sat quietly on my bedside table, yet it somehow felt louder than every thought in my mind. Why had she asked me to wait until morning? Why not let me read it immediately? My husband smiled every time he noticed me looking at it, but even he admitted he was curious. As the first sunlight entered our bedroom the next day, I finally picked up the envelope with slightly trembling hands. I thought it would contain advice about retirement. Instead, the very first sentence completely changed the meaning of everything we had learned so far. The letter began with 7 unforgettable words. Your future begins before you notice it. I stopped reading. Not because the sentence was difficult. Because it felt deeply true. Grandma continued by describing something she called ordinary investments. She wasn't talking about retirement accounts. She wasn't talking about stocks. She was talking about habits. She wrote that every peaceful dinner shared as a family was an investment. Every yearly medical checkup was an investment. Every honest conversation between husband and wife was an investment. Every walk after dinner. Every hug. Every apology. Every moment spent listening instead of rushing. Those were investments too. I suddenly realized why she had asked me to wait until morning. The message wasn't supposed to end my day. It was supposed to begin a new one. Researchers who study habit formation often explain that our daily routines quietly shape our future far more than occasional dramatic decisions. Tiny actions repeated consistently become powerful because they require less effort over time while producing lasting results. Reading Grandma's letter, I understood that retirement planning wasn't really a financial event waiting somewhere in the distance. It had already started. With today's choices. With today's conversations. With today's priorities. When my husband joined me at the breakfast table, I handed him the letter without saying anything. He read every line slowly. Then he smiled. I think your grandmother understands life better than most financial experts. I laughed. So do I. That morning, another beautiful English expression naturally became part of our conversation. Little things matter. Such a short sentence. Only 3 easy words. Simple pronunciation. Common vocabulary. Yet it perfectly captured the heart of Grandma's message. I repeated it several times. Little things matter. That is exactly why I enjoy learning English through meaningful stories. Simple expressions become unforgettable because they carry emotions instead of existing only inside textbooks. Later that afternoon, my husband suggested something unexpected. What if, he asked, we add one more section to our notebook? I smiled. What should we call it? He thought for a moment. Then he wrote 4 words across the top of a blank page. Legacy Beyond Money. The title immediately caught my attention. Instead of writing financial goals, we began listing the values we hoped our children would remember years from now. Be kind. Stay curious. Protect your health. Keep learning. Respect your family. Plan with hope, not fear. By the time we finished, the page had become one of my favorites. It contained almost no numbers. Only character. Only love. Only purpose. That evening, while putting the notebook back on the shelf, a folded photograph quietly slipped out from between its pages. Neither my husband nor I remembered placing it there. I picked it up. It showed Grandma standing beside Grandpa many years earlier. On the back, someone had written a single handwritten sentence that neither of us had ever seen before. As soon as I read those words aloud, my husband slowly sat down in complete silence. Because that one forgotten sentence explained everything we had been searching for since the very first retirement letter arrived in our mailbox. The sentence behind the photograph. The faded photograph slipped from our notebook so quietly that it almost landed face down on the floor. I picked it up, smiled at the picture of Grandma and Grandpa standing hand in hand on their small front porch, and almost placed it back. Then I noticed there was handwriting on the back. It wasn't long. Just one sentence. But after reading it aloud, neither my husband nor I spoke for nearly a full minute. It wasn't because the words were complicated. It was because they explained an entire lifetime in only a few seconds. The best retirement plan, Grandpa had written, is becoming the person your family will still need, even when they no longer need your paycheck. I read the sentence again. More slowly this time. It felt almost impossible that one line could carry so much meaning. My husband quietly leaned back in his chair. "I wish I had met your grandfather," he whispered. "So do I replied. Suddenly, every conversation we had shared over the past few weeks began connecting like pieces of a puzzle. The notebook. The letters. The family dinners. The small habits. The focus on health. The dreams. None of it had really been about retirement. It had always been about identity. Who would we become after work was no longer the center of our daily lives. That question stayed with me. Researchers who study healthy aging often explain that people who maintain a strong sense of purpose after retirement tend to report greater emotional well-being, stronger social connections, and higher life satisfaction. Financial preparation certainly matters, but purpose gives that preparation direction. Money can create opportunities, but purpose gives those opportunities meaning. For the first time, I understood why Grandma never spoke about retirement with fear. She had never retired from caring. She had never retired from learning. She had never retired from loving her family. She had simply changed how she spent her time. That realization felt incredibly freeing. Later that afternoon, my husband and I returned to our notebook one more time. This time, we created a page titled, "Who do we want to become?" The answers came surprisingly quickly. Patient. Healthy. Curious. Generous. Available. Present. Not one answer involved money. Not because finances were unimportant, but because money alone could never become our identity. As we finished writing, my husband smiled and introduced another simple English phrase that immediately became one of my favorites. Live with purpose. 3 easy words. Clear pronunciation. Natural American English. The kind of expression you hear in conversations, books, podcasts, and everyday life. I repeated it quietly. Live with purpose. That simple sentence became my favorite English lesson of the week. Meaning always makes vocabulary easier to remember. Before dinner, our daughter walked into the room and noticed the new notebook page. She read every word carefully. Then she smiled. I think this notebook is becoming our family tradition." I laughed. "I think you're right." She disappeared upstairs for a few minutes. When she returned, she was carrying something that immediately caught my attention. It was a brand new notebook. On the cover, she had already written one title: "My future starts today." Seeing those words filled my heart with quiet joy. Without us realizing it, planning had become something much bigger than retirement. It had become hope passed from one generation to the next. Just before bedtime, my phone vibrated with a message from Grandma. There were only 8 words. "I forgot to tell you one last thing." I smiled. Then I opened the message. What Grandma revealed in that final note would become the perfect ending to everything our family had learned about planning ahead. Living intentionally, and creating a future filled with far more than financial security. The last lesson changed everything. Grandma's final message arrived just before I turned off the lights, and I almost waited until morning to read it. I'm so glad I didn't. It contained only one short paragraph, yet it brought every conversation, every letter, every page of our notebook, and every quiet family dinner together in a way I never expected. She wrote, "People spend years planning to stop working, but too few people plan how to keep living with joy." I read those words twice. Then I quietly looked across the room at my husband, already smiling before I even said a single word. At that moment, I realized the greatest retirement plan had never been hidden inside a financial document. It had been growing inside our family all along. The next morning, we gathered around the kitchen table as we had done so many times before. The notebook rested between us. This time, no one reached for a calculator. No one talked about numbers. Instead, we began reading the pages we had written together over the past few weeks. Family dinners. Morning walks. Helping our children. Taking care of our health. Learning new skills. Protecting our peace. Living with purpose. Every page reminded us that our future wasn't waiting somewhere far away. It was quietly being built today. One ordinary choice at a time. Researchers who study long-term happiness often find that people who combine financial preparation with meaningful relationships, healthy routines, and a clear sense of purpose tend to experience greater life satisfaction than those who focus on money alone. Financial security creates options, but gratitude, connection, and daily habits determine how those options are actually enjoyed. That truth felt incredibly comforting. Retirement planning no longer sounded intimidating. It sounded hopeful. My husband looked at me and smiled. "You know," he said, "I don't think this notebook is finished." I laughed. "I don't think it ever will be." He nodded. "That's the point." Every year would bring new dreams, new lessons, new priorities. Planning wasn't a single event. It was simply another way of paying attention to the people and moments that mattered most. Before breakfast, our daughter quietly placed her own notebook beside ours. She had already written several pages. Not about retirement. About kindness. Friendships. Health. Future goals. Watching her write reminded me that the greatest legacy parents can leave isn't only financial stability. It is showing children how to live intentionally. That morning, one final English expression naturally became part of our conversation. The best is yet to come. I smiled as I repeated it. The best is yet to come. Simple words. Clear pronunciation. Beautiful meaning. Exactly the kind of everyday American English expression that stays in your memory because it carries hope instead of complexity. That is why I love learning English through real stories. You don't just practice listening or reading. You quietly collect phrases that become part of your own life. Looking back now, I smile whenever I remember that ordinary envelope sitting on our kitchen counter. I almost ignored it. I thought it contained paperwork. Instead, it gave our family a new perspective. Planning didn't teach me to fear the future. It taught me to appreciate today. Our retirement plan became much more than preparing for life after work. It became a promise to protect our relationships, our health, our peace, and the ordinary moments that make a home feel warm. If there is one lesson I hope stays with you after this story, it is this. Plan your finances wisely. But never forget to plan your time, your kindness, your health, and the memories you want to create with the people you love. Because one day, those memories may become the richest part of your future. That's all for today. I'll make many more videos like this in the future. Please subscribe so you won't miss them.